I'm Ray Makela. I'm Managing Director of the Talent and Training Business at SBI. And I'll say that some of you may know us as SRG, Sales Readiness Group. I was a partner and managing director there for about 12 years. We became part of the SBI family a year ago in July. And I'll tell a little bit more about that story, but essentially to be the training and talent arm to complement the go-to-market and consulting and advisory work that we do. So that's why I'm here. I'm thrilled to be able to share some of the research that we've done over the last 3 or 4 months in partnership with the Revenue Enablement Society. And Bill and I are going to walk through the initial, other than a very small sneak peek we did in September, this will be the first time we've presented this. So we're excited to get your feedback to really kick the tires a little bit. And we'll say this is a work in progress. So we look forward to kind of evolving this with you all. And with that, Bill, do you want to say hello? I'll let you introduce yourself.
I don't want to introduce myself, but instead, I want to talk about expectations from you guys today that I'm kind of making up on the spot, but that's what I do, so it's all good. There's some pieces of paper that you got at your table. Before you start drawing a picture of your favorite animal on it, we're going to call for you to use it. But what you'll find is, at least I found, is that I walk away from these, not these sessions, but like the conference with like, okay, maybe on the plane when I'm trying to not fall asleep on the way home, like I think about, okay, this is how I want to get organized to tell my boss or whoever like what I'm bringing home. I think the questions that Ray and SBI put together for you on the might be better served to take with you on the plane. So if you want to answer some of them today, great, and we are going to call on you to use them. But feel free to just take them with you as reference of what you're going to do when you go back to work. Last thing is we're going to stop a lot and ask you questions. But please interrupt me as we go along. Don't interrupt Ray, but definitely interrupt me. Say, hey, I've got a question. This is not, there's a little bit of insight here. There's a lot of data. And this is something that, as an evolving profession, we got to talk about data and not insights. We got to figure out the insights together. So that's what you guys are here for. We're just here to present and guide you through the information that a lot of our peers put out. Some of you may have too. And we'll go from there.
That's great. All right. Thanks, Bill. All right. Let's jump in. I'm going to go through this next slide, if I can. Relatively quickly, but it's just a setup of how to orient and how to think about us. So the third column on sales training, that's where I live, right? The talent and training business. We have a sales training and sales management curriculum we offer to our clients. As I mentioned, we became part of the SBI family because we complement the go-to-market strategy, the consulting work, the advisory business, and recently a RevTech and RevOps company, the Carabiner Group, that we acquired last May, kind of completes that package. So now we can really go from strategy all the way to RevOps and support that. The reason I wanted to show this is we've been a sponsor and a partner with Revenue Enablement Society from the beginning. We've sponsored a number of the receptions, a number of the different events along the way, and helped found the Seattle chapter. But we didn't have the research capability that we're talking about today. So now being part of the SBI family, we were able to leverage our research team. And I went to Gail and the board earlier this summer and said, hey, what would it look like if we were to do a sales enablement survey, a revenue enablement survey, leveraging our research capabilities and present it at the conference? And here we are. So thank you to the board and Revenue Enablement Society and many of you in the room who completed the survey and gave us your feedback. So this is actually group sourced. This is your input, and we're happy to share it with you today. So what we want to do is walk through kind of why we did this originally, the premise behind it. Look at segmenting top performing organizations. So what did we find initially about what sales enablement was doing differently, and what insights can we start to glean? As Bill said, it's a work in progress. What are some of the current priorities that we're seeing? And then again, what can we take away from this? What can we do going forward? And what deserves more work and more discussion. So that's really where we're headed. Just in terms of the background behind this and why we partnered. So I shared a little bit about the premise is we wanted to be able to take those capabilities and share some of that with you all and help to guide some of the decisions and some of the takeaways from the conference. But Bill, I think you wanted to share as well, from a Revenue Enablement Society perspective, kind of what intrigued you and how we partnered together on this.
Yeah, I've got kind of a professional and a personal perspective on this. When Ray and I went through the deck, and there've been like 6 or 7 iterations of it, and we've even coached SBI back to change some things from insights back to data so we could talk more about it. Well, the slide that he just had up about like, here's SBI and here's our capabilities and that kind of thing, like a lot of us have worked with salespeople to not show the capabilities right at the front of the deck, right? So that was my thought, but I was thinking like, this is the whole reason why the society did this study with SBI, because we wanted to do something real with somebody credible. Has anyone seen, there was a Netflix documentary, my mic's still alive, okay.
Yeah,
there was a Netflix documentary about people who believe the earth was flat.
Behind the curve.
Behind the curve, right. So what was the premise of Behind the Curve, do you remember?
That there is this entire subgroup of individuals who are convinced that it's a giant conspiracy that the Earth is round.
Right. So there's some crazy people, right? Good. But like, what did they do throughout the film, or throughout the documentary?
Deny evidence over and over.
Right. So they kept doing these experiments, and they honestly kept proving that the Earth was round, and they'd be like, okay, well, maybe if we tweak it this way next time, it'll do that. Yeah, we're just not getting the experiment right. That screamed this whole year at me. I've seen survey after survey of like super negative stuff. Like, enablement's broken, enablement sucks. And this, don't you agree with this? All the questions are leading questions. Peter Ostro, give me an example of a leading question.
On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being pretty good and 5 being amazing, how handsome is Bill Ball?
Right, exactly. So which, all of those numbers are wrong. So
did he prep you for that?
No. We go seat of the pants here.
Yeah.
So what's frustrating about that is like those surveys are self-serving, and they just point back to whoever's putting the survey on and say, guess what? I'm the person that can fix everything. It points back to my business or my company or my new consulting practice or whatever it is. And like, people are like, applauding it on LinkedIn and saying, oh, this is great data. And I'm like, Jesus, no, it's not. No, it's not. So finally we got it. I know I'm taking too long, right? I'm excited to talk about this with all of you guys because this is from real people, real practitioners. Did anybody take the survey in here? Okay, a couple of us, four or five of us. So you won't be surprised, but I was certainly surprised by what I saw.
That's great. Well, let's get into it. And yeah, I think it is, it'll be interesting to get your all's feedback. But I wanted to start, and Keenan touched on this earlier, and you've seen the data, and it's not too surprising, but it's tough out there, right? So this is looking at a 3-year cycle, so this year included. But in terms of the trend, 12% decline in revenue growth across the subset, and this was from several different surveys we pulled together. So revenue's declining, and quota attainment is continuing to go down. So in this case, 56% in 2023, about a 4% drop over that period year over year. And so fewer sellers are achieving quota. It's getting harder to grow. Sales enablement is even more important. And so what are we doing about it, right? And I think that kind of tees us up for the discussion about the priorities we're going to talk about. So, yes?
Sure, can I ask a question? So, I mean, FY21 is sort of the long tail of COVID, right? And like our explosion of technology needed in that area. What did it look like prior to that? Like 2018, 2019?
I don't have that data here. I mean, I think we all probably have different perspectives depending on our markets. I think we had, flat growth for a while, and then you're right, COVID disrupted, and then we came out of it, so things grew rapidly. But I think when we look at growing less than we're desired, and quota attainment, in my mind, is the real metric here. We're still not helping reps hit quota, or they're still not getting there. And I can go back. I'll follow up, and we can provide it. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the survey itself. Just in terms of the demographics, we look across industries, but it is tech forward. It is a little bit more tech heavy. We do a lot of work in SaaS, and also all of you represent a higher percentage of tech audience, and we're more likely to fill out the survey. So about 56% were in some sort of software or tech related. Also in terms of the roles, primarily sales enablement professionals. We did get some RevOps and others, which is not surprising. Sometimes they overlap and the roles aren't perfectly clear. And team size, it was mixed as well. So we had some smaller one plus type FTEs, but the majority was either in the 5+ FTE practitioners. So we're looking at a sizable enough, and I think that helped to drive some of the priorities too, because what we found when we were having a discussion earlier with a small group is, if you're a team of one, you're probably spending a lot of your time doing content and just fighting fires, and you don't have time to get to the other 6 or 7 priorities. And I think a lot of us have felt that, right? So we'll see. I think looking at the larger teams, it's more helpful to get an idea of what those priorities look like. So I'm going to keep us moving. What we found was there were 7.5 was the average number of responsibility areas in scope for revenue organizations across the survey respondents. And I'll show you kind of what that looks like. But here's what was the initial and kind of interesting finding to start with, is when we asked about proficiency levels across those different areas of scope or those priorities, only 14% said they were in scope and proficient. So we say that these are all proficient or these are all important to us, but yet we don't feel as good about how we're doing relative to those. And we're going to get into the specifics on that. I don't know if that surprises anyone, but there were some pretty interesting gaps, and that's what we're going to talk about and what we're really going to get into in this discussion. So there's a lot here. You can see where some of the gaps start to break out. But again, the way to look at this is the dark bars are those things that were a priority. They were in scope for those organizations. And the blue is how they rated their own proficiency across those particular areas. And so when we look at those middle 3, those are the largest gap areas. So we have a 31% gap on go-to-market alignment, 45% gap on measurement and analytics, and a 30% gap on RevTech management. I will clarify in case there are questions, go-to-market alignment. So this is the alignment across your go-to-market function within the organization. So that's like making sure that the ICP and personas marketing is talking about are the ones that the sales team is actually going to market with. And sometimes we see a little disconnect. I don't know if anyone's found that wait a minute, that's not reality, or maybe there's some work to be done there. But it's that coordination, so I wanted to clarify that. And measurement and analytics, huge priority, but we feel like either we don't have the capability or we don't have the skills or the data that we need to be able to get at that information. So we're actually going to open it up, and Bill, I'll let you speak to this.
Yeah.
If I'd love to get your observations, and then we'll have the group here discuss as well.
Yeah, we're going to throw this back to you guys in just a couple of seconds and then take some insights from you. For me, when I first saw this, and I beat up Ray and SBI on what the heck cross go-to-market alignment was, because I didn't know that. But yeah, that's I want to strike a distinction between that and go-to-market strategy with a quick show of hands. First off, how many of you help orchestrate the go-to-market process in your business to success? Okay, so like half of you? Okay, so that's the distinction I want to make. Who actually comes up with the go-to-market strategy, or who leans in on deciding what we go to market for in our respective businesses? Okay, just very few of us. So that's why that second number is so low, and that's how I interpreted the data. The other two things that were low that weren't a surprise to me were the customer enablement and partner enablement. One, because I keep seeing, I don't know about you, does anybody do partner enablement in here? Okay. Yeah, I figured you probably owned it somewhere, Sarah. And do you do it directly, or do you just own it in your org?
I own it in the org.
Okay. So the thing about partner enablement is, if so many of us are struggling to deal with our internal people, guess who gets sacrificed in the budget somewhere if you don't have a big sales enablement org? I see all of these partner enablement jobs, and I'm like, how is that job even getting funded? I think it's really, really, really interesting. And customer enablement is a little bit new. Like we're not even on the crest of the wave of that yet, right? So those are the things that kind of like made sense to me. But what I'd like you guys to do is look at your neighbor, and these tables are very appropriate for this, except for the three people here. So you guys are just going to have to figure that math out yourself. But I want you to look to your neighbor and just take 3 minutes to discuss, like, what are the biggest gaps for you? Like, what are you doing well? And then what are the biggest gaps for you, and what are you going to do about it? And then we'll come back and get some takeaways after, like, what, 5 minutes?
Yeah, let's give you 5
minutes.
We are going to then talk about what high-performing organizations are doing, so we'll make that link, but want to get your input first.
All right, is this going as okay for you?
Yeah.
Good.
Great. Yeah, we have a hat out here.
Okay.
Hey there, how are you?
Great, how are
Good,
you?
good. We'll have to catch up. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, of course.
Congrats on your award too, by the way. I saw that.
I
Yeah.
know, 1 year so far.
Yeah. Well done. That's great.
Well, I'm wondering if she
Yeah.
You're a good looking guy.
Hey, what's a better generational analogy, like for everybody that's not at this table or me and Ray? Like Hatfields versus McCoys. What's a like?
Something like a
No, well, yeah, well, like we're gonna break the group up a little bit. So like, what's a more like? Okay, all right. Yeah, that's. I don't want to trigger it. Like,
Well, just generically, blue and red.
yes,
Does
yeah.
Taylor Swift have a battle? Team Taylor and Team Mariana?
Well, like you'll see, but it's like one of the insights that like came back was quota carrying is an important ingredient. Like quota carrying in the past is an important ingredient in the top tier of teams. We see that, right? But I think we have enough young people in this room that they may think else. So I want to hear a point from either side. Is like I just want to throw that back to the audience.
Here's a great quote from Jim Jones' story for High Spot. Most sales enablement people are responsible for teaching salespeople things. Most of them have never sold or been a teacher. What would you mean?
All right, you want me to run the mic? I'll run around with a mic with a couple of them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just grab a couple.
All right.
Yeah. Biggest gap.
All right, let's start wrapping it up because I'm going to come by and visit you and see what you think. Wrapping it up like you've got 10 seconds. Look at that. It just simmered right down. So great. That was 10 seconds of love.
Bill, I think we have a question or a comment back here.
Question about how you define customer enablement.
So that's where you are really focused on helping the customer be more successful. So
Pre or post? Pre or post?
both.
Or both?
Both, yeah.
Yeah, the journey.
Thank you.
Can I get a volunteer for a discussion?
that often.
Something that something that you're doing well, and something that you're gonna work on, and why? Anybody? Yeah.
Something that we do really well is our onboarding and then everboarding. Do you want any backstory or just?
Yeah, I think people probably want to hear more like what you want to work on and why.
Yeah, so for what we want to work on is the measurements and analytics and metrics, because with the migration of CRM from Microsoft to Salesforce that just completed a couple months ago, we have a lot of systems that aren't talking to each other, even to date. Like right now, Gong is not plugged in, Seismic is not plugged in to Salesforce, so we're missing a lot of data that can allow us to not only identify the usage and the uptake and adoption, but more importantly, the actual impacts that are being made as a result of, okay, we created this, we trained on it, and this is, demonstrating the actual output, but we don't even have that way to track it just yet.
We have all this great stuff, and it's hard to tell a story about how it's all working together. That's awesome. One more. Somebody else.
She's a plant.
I am a plant. No, I actually, we talked about it at our table, and I'm going to speak on behalf of the Revenue Enablement Society and not actually my org, in the first three columns are what we would consider core enablement, right? Like all of us, most likely, almost all of us do those three things. But look at the proficiency numbers for those three. They're lower than I would want, right? And so when we are here at this meeting for Prove It, I want everybody to come out feeling way more proficient in those areas. And we've got a great comment from our table that we devalue what we do. It's not even just coming externally, we devalue it. So, Revenue Enablement Society focus, we want to get those numbers up.
Awesome.
That's great. All right, so we're going to keep us moving because what we want to do is then start to look at what the higher performing organizations were doing. But I think it is great to just capture for yourself, why is that gap there? And are we doing things to narrow the gap? And can we enable our enablement teams, right, to be more successful in those areas that we say are important? So what we wanted to do is look at what high performance looks like across the subset of the respondents. And we looked at the quota attainment, so those that were exceeding the mean for achieving quota on their sales teams, higher revenue growth. So again, they were operating in a moderate to high growth environment. So we asked, were they below average, above, very high? And so we looked at that group, and then we also looked at their proficiency levels and said, okay, what does the group look like that's at a higher proficiency than others? And the sweet spot in the middle, right, is what we said those were high performing. It was about 20% of the audience that responded. We said, okay, what's different about them, or what can we start to glean from them? And we're still digging in and still, learning from that subset, but I think it represents an interesting analysis. So that's how we defined high performance that we're going to talk about going forward. So what do they do differently? What do high performing enablement teams do differently? And there were four kind of key things that jumped out. And again, these are initial insights. The one thing I did want to say about this, we're going to be publishing this as a series of reports. There's a wealth of data that we're digging into, that we're analyzing. And so it'll come out and we'll have access and make that available through Revenue Enablement Society. We're doing a webinar in November, I believe. We're doing a webinar, and we'll be talking about that and making the report available during that session. So looking forward to that. But here are the first four that came out. One, and this may be interesting, and we're going to have a little time to talk about this, but the top sales enablement, the top organizations, their sales enablement teams, had sales enablement practitioners who had quota carrying experience. I see a number of you nodding, saying, yeah, that makes sense. Those of you who maybe didn't carry a bag or don't have that experience are going, yeah, but wait a minute, we're good too, which we absolutely agree with. But we're going to show you that data in a little bit more detail. They looked at more and different metrics, and this was interesting, is they were measuring more things. We'll show you exactly what those metrics are than some of the others in the response. They train more of their sellers, and we would expect this, but the data proved that out. So not just there's some sales training, but they're training a majority of their teams every year. There's everboarding, onboarding, and ongoing training. And they focus on sales manager training, which, frankly, we expected, but there's a gap between, we hear it a lot and we know that there's a big focus on it, yet it's not as high as we would like or we would expect it to be, and there's still lots of room for improvement, but top performing organizations tend to invest in their managers. That was kind of a key takeaway. So let's dig into that in a little bit more detail. So top performing organizations tend to seek out people who have carried a bag. So 95% of the top performing organization had sales enablement practitioners who had quota carrying experience. And what's really interesting is, 86+% actually had 3 or more years. So not just they'd sold, but they actually had sold and been there for a while. And you can see all others was lower on both accounts. But Bill, I know you had some observations or thoughts on this.
Well, I think that some of these, this is why this is data, you guys, and not insights. And some of it, when I saw it, was a little triggering for me. If I can, be my whole true self and emotionally available to all of you. So what I'd like now is to see a show of hands. First, for people who believe that in their experience or whatever else drives this belief, that quota carrying experience is essential for top performing enablement teams. Okay, good, not everybody. Okay, I'm going to ask for a volunteer to speak from group number 1. So for the rest of you, I would assume, unless you just sat that out and were asleep, that you believe that it's not essential. So show of hands, who believes that quota carrying experience is not essential for top performing enablement teams? Okay, great. So this is what I need, and this is what I'm going to get. So I'm going to give group 2 a second to think about it. But this is not going to be a why or why not kind of question. From group 2, I would like a volunteer for what do you do instead? What do you do to deal with or overcome the lack of quota carrying experience or deal with that in your team? I'll let you brew on that. I'm going to come back to a volunteer for that. For group number 1, I just want to hear a volunteer from that side on why quota carrying experience is so essential for top performing enablement teams. I saw Chuck's hand go up first.
What I found in my career of about 18 years in the enablement space and leadership is that the best teams for enablement are those that have people that can create the empathy and can sit down with the sellers and show them how to do anything that we're asking them to do. So when you're training a subject and you really want them to follow and actually try this stuff, if you can tell stories, if you can actually sit down by their side and do, and create that empathy and create that belief, they'll try to do it. I've seen too many times when somebody comes in with just an academic background or a learning and design background, and they'll try to run a class, though it's technically fantastic, it just doesn't hit because it doesn't resonate with them. It doesn't speak their language. They don't believe there's something that goes amiss where it's academic instead of practical, and then the sellers don't try it.
How are we doing on time, Ray? Do we have any follow-up?
We should get the count. We need to get the counterpoint, and then we. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I will say, because I'm not going to show my hand on this. Who's going? Is it Sarah? Is it Sarah? Did you guys nominate Sarah?
No.
Okay, Sarah, you got voluntold. Yeah, before I jump in with Sarah, I do want to say it's interesting. Somebody told me, an analyst told me recently, he was like, there's so many sales enablement professionals. And it's hard enough when you haven't sold, but if you're teaching sales skills to salespeople and you haven't taught and you haven't sold, wow. I think there's something to that. I think that's kind of interesting. Sarah, so what do you have to do to overcome if you haven't sold? How do you drive it forward?
Well, I say this as a seller turned enabler. So I really used to believe that you had to speak the language, if you will. Then we implemented something called the voice of councils, and we started to get AEs that wanted to be part of it, CSMs that wanted to be part of creating the solutions with us. And I ended up bringing in folks that had a variety of different backgrounds. I have teachers on my team. I've got folks that were at other tech companies that weren't in a sales capacity that have moved over. And I think it's this cool meshing. So I don't disagree. I think as you're creating your enablement team, you have to have some folks that have come internally, you have to have some folks that have come externally, and a mishmash of experience, because that's what gets you to use the voice of the team to really get to the next level.
Awesome.
And I love that story because I'll say, as an external trainer that often comes in, it's even if you've carried a bag, sometimes there's still that organ rejection, right? You don't know us, you don't get us, we're special, you don't understand. We've used voice of the seller videos, you just interviewing those and sprinkling them in. And now, hey, don't take our word for it. Here's your. So I think that's a great idea to bring that voice in, even if you haven't necessarily done it.
I kind of feel, I know we need to move, but I think that there's more to say on this. Like, and Sarah probably has one of the bigger teams of anybody in this room, I'm just guessing. So there's a mature team, there's a lot of functions, a lot of things happening there. But I think it's a big yes and versus a yeah but on this. Whereas if we can equip people, I think we'll also agree with the universal truth is sellers follow sellers, right? Like that's the most influential person on a seller is another seller. So how we leverage that may start changing these numbers eventually.
Yeah. And I think it's great to think, okay, so what else can we do, even if we have that quota carrying experience, but leveraging the best practices. All right, I'm going to keep us moving. This was interesting. We looked at what metrics are being used to measure effectiveness. So there are a lot of metrics here. Top 10 metrics that gauge the revenue enablement effectiveness. And you can see the top performers tend to focus in on more metrics. And so it's really interesting that there are several that jumped out with bigger gaps, and we suspect that there's some things going on here. One, those organizations may be more mature, so they're able to measure, and I think that came up this morning. Sometimes you don't have the sales ops function, you don't have the capabilities, you can't get those, but you can measure revenue, you can measure quota attainment, you can measure, kind of standard KPIs. But I think it is, thinking about a balanced scorecard, we're measuring a lot of different things, and top performing organizations tend to lean in on all of those. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Bill.
I'm hoping my comments didn't cause that person to leave because I haven't been cursing. It's all good. So I want to offer one clarifying thing, because another thing that put my little sales enablement brain in a tizzy was pipeline to quota coverage ratio. That just sounds like
just rolls off the tongue.
Yeah,
right?
I feel like AI is trying to coach me right now. So that's the marketing 3X thing. And where it lands in our world is if things aren't in the right stages, it's a bunch of noise. So I wanted to clarify that one first. But I've got a real basic question for the audience on this one. When I first saw this, I was like, holy crap, that's a lot of things. What I want to ask you is, why do you think there's so many up here? Like, why do people weigh in on all of these things? When they're struggling in so many areas, why are there so many of these? Anybody got a thought?
Because we can.
Yeah.
There's leading and lagging indicators. So your lagging indicators tell you there's a problem, the leading will tell you where the problems are. So you need both.
Okay, so mixture of leading and lagging indicators up here, that's fair. Anything else to add? Why there's so many of these up here? This seems like a job in itself. Yeah?
They're struggling with the algorithm of what excellence looks like. And so more metrics, we think, might solve that, help them find that. In other words, what are the 3 or 4 best ones? What are the 2 best ones? Can't figure that out, gather more data.
So that was my gut, was we're spreading out to capture all these things because we haven't quite refined all of the flavors of success except in the most mature organizations, right? And if you look at something like time to productivity, Sandy will tell you this, right? If you partner with a RevOps leader like Sandy, then she may be able to work out time to productivity for you. But you're not going to walk into an organization that you're trying to turn around and they've got time to first XYZ as a metric they're reporting on. They've got win rates, they've got some of this other stuff, right? How many calls a mature AE makes that we all know, why the hell are you measuring that? But they don't have the time to productivity stuff, and I think that's why that's so low.
Mm-hmm. And I love the lagging and leading. I think some of this is root cause, right? So if you just measured quota and win rates, and you miss that metric, it's like, why? How do we figure out and diagnose? And we need the next level to start to diagnose where the problem is and figure out, is it a velocity problem? Is it a selling skills problem? What is the underlying issue going on there? So, Sandy.
I also see some things like training completion rate and certification pass rate. So there's, I think, a lot of we want to make sure we're proving our value and things like that. So there are some metrics that might be, a little bit easier to track and easier to say oh, hey, look at, all these trainings this person completed and those kind of things. So I think it's a mix in that way.
So, and really interesting point. One of the things we're talking about for a future webinar is bringing in a couple of CROs to say, hey, what do you care about? Yeah. And often the question is, I don't really care if they're still missing quota or if they haven't improved their skills or if we're not getting there. So it may feel like we're doing that, kind of like smile sheets. It's like, well, that's great. They liked it, but did it matter?
But it may be somebody's MBO too. So I've seen leaders give MBOs did you do a certain amount of trainings or did you complete a certain amount of trainings, but did that actually impact the business? And I'm like, that doesn't really matter if you're just checking a box.
Right.
To say
This is Keenan this morning, right? The analogy that I was hearing in my head, and then I want to go to you in the back, is I don't care. As a CRO, I don't care how the sausage was made if you didn't make the sausage, right? That's what we're talking about, right? If we didn't hit the number, if we didn't go to the target, you're just telling me how the sausage was made, but you never made the sausage. And so from that kind of perspective, I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so I'm trying to answer the question of why do top performing enablement teams have more metrics than others? I think because all of those metrics, part of it is the leading and lagging indicator, part of it is
one more over here,
the root cause comment from before, but individual reps, individual teams have different challenges, right? And so if a particular team or rep is challenged with top of the funnel lead generation, then the metrics that you would use, leading, lagging, et cetera, to track whether that rep's improvement are going to be different than someone who struggles with negotiations and has the lowest ACV across the team. And so I think, in a way, maybe having more metrics reflects a deeper understanding of the nuanced needs of the team and that they're tracking different things because people need different interventions.
Yep.
That's a whole chapter, right? So I think there's something to what you're saying, but there's also a lot to unpack there. So thank you for raising that point. Let's do one more, Chuck.
Yep.
Just talk about this because metrics has always been a passion of mine on this, and there's always been we've been debating metrics for many of these conferences, but is the metrics of training completion and certifications so high because it's easy for us on the tools that we own as enablement versus very hard to attain from the business, from the RevOps, and the high-performing enablement teams are closely tied, have a very close relationship with RevOps, which provides them the data, the business data they need to be high-performing enablement teams. So the underlying thing we're not saying here is if you do not have a tight metric relationship, symbiotic relationship with your RevOps team, you're sort of hobbled before you even get out of the gate.
Sandy is loving this.
And it takes a certain maturity in the organization to even get that to get that data.
You have to have your CRO who values that and will pull your RevOps person and say, hey, you're salt and pepper. You're equal to me, but you have to work together. If you're not working together, I hold you both as favor. That's the only time I've ever seen it work.
Chuck, you're right though. And I think I'll raise this to everybody just as a thought, right? 3 conferences ago or 3 or 4 years ago, where we saying it's essential that you're aligned strategically with RevOps as business partners to be able to show the movie how it needs to be shown, right? We weren't talking about that 4 years ago in the same way that we are now.
Yeah. And I think the takeaway is correlates to higher performance. So if we get it right,
Good point, Chuck.
there is a
Thank you.
correlation that it's working. All right, we have about 6 minutes left. I want to make sure that at least we share the information, and then we'll give you some other takeaways and discussions to think about going forward. So
One more triggering thing, I think.
that's right. Variable comp, and pretty consistent across the board, except top performers, and this was interesting, but tend to have a stronger correlation to measure time to productivity. So, and again, not everyone was doing it, but again, I suspect because they're able to measure it. Curious, how many people have that in a scorecard or in a comp plan? Okay, a few, probably about that, 25%. And the others, we would expect revenue growth, quota attainment, et cetera, but we know we can't affect or we can't necessarily take control of all of those, but we need to show that top line correlation.
I wonder about the first two versus the last three. What do you guys think are different about the first two versus the last three?
There's a whole lot of noise in the first two, relatively speaking. Because that was on my comp plan at one point for the first two. And I didn't feel it was fair because there's a bunch of stuff that I can't necessarily affect. It's easy to measure, yes, but I don't feel like I have a good handle. If there's 5 hands on the wheel driving the bus, I don't even feel like I have a hand on the wheel. I'm in the back seat, you know what I'm saying? Versus the last 3 are a little bit more, like Peter this morning gave us some ways to map to some of those things that we can then prove, oh yeah, we did these things and therefore we had some correlative effect on it. But I think the first 2 are easy to measure.
Right. But yeah, you can't control the economy. You can't control the headwinds and other things. So yeah, and I think again, we're not prescribing, but we're sharing. This is what those organizations shared with us or how they responded. So let me just kind of keep us moving. We looked at enablement teams, training and coaching. And so again, this was an area, and I kind of previewed it earlier, that we expected, that top performing organizations tend to lean in and spend more time on dedicated training programs, but only 68% even of those top performing. So there was still a pretty big gap. And, if the organizations were prioritizing coaching for sales managers, about half of those. I don't know what's going on here. I would have expected that to be higher in the top performing, and maybe they're still getting to it. Maybe there's still work to be done there. That was interesting.
I think it's asking the right question. And I'm tired of going to conferences and sessions and people telling me the right things to do versus talking about what's blocking the right things to do. Most of us know the right freaking things to do. So the right freaking things to do is to work and develop our managers. What I want to hear from you guys, and we're just about, I think, ready to wrap it in time, but what I'd like to hear from you guys is what's blocking? Why are we not, higher in the numbers here? What's blocking enablement for managers? Yeah. A lot of managers don't think so they self-assess and okay. What else? Time. What do you mean by that, Sarah?
Too many priorities, and there's not enough time in the day.
So that's interesting, right? Because it's the value of the time, and where it could be spent.
So putting that chart up that shows the hockey stick, if you coach at the end of the quarter, it's kind of void time and how you have to have that progression curve. And I think we can say it all the time. I always tell my CRO, I'm the carrot, you're the stick, and you have to have both in order to create the culture.
How many people are doing time studies with their frontline managers or have done a time study? Do we know? I'd love to hear more about that.
We did how many dashboards do you want to do?
Right? I think we need to be talking about how they're allocating their time and what's on their stop doing list, right? We put a lot of stuff on their to-do list. We give them more technology. Hey, help roll this out. Now you're in charge of this. Now we need this meeting, this internal thing. How much of that is customer facing or rep facing? How much are they spending time on their customers, which are their salespeople? So I think that's one of those things is maybe our priorities are a little bit misaligned on the frontline managers. And I think a time study is really enlightening that says, oh yeah, they're maybe not focused on the things that matter.
Yeah.
I think that.
Go ahead, Sandy. We'll get a listen next.
No, I think that the CRO drives this, right? So if the CRO's not in it, the CRO's not doing the coaching, they're not mandating that leading by example, that their sales leaders are embracing the coaching and applying it. I think that is the challenge in a lot of organizations. That's what I've seen.
So I agree with you, Sandy. I think that the full court press of stakeholder alignment is a lot higher bar than train the sellers, right?
Yeah.
I think turnover has been a real challenge. Like I'm consulting right now and have recommended manager coaching programs, and there's such a high turnover in managers and even CROs that it's hard to maintain those programs or get them to be consistent just because managers aren't there.
Right. If you've got a head of sales who's leaving every 18 months and there's a new plan coming in every time, that's another challenge.
Yep.
All right. Ray.
So,
yep.
Let's take us home. And I mean, we could spend a whole other hour here. But I look forward to continuing the conversation. Just wanted to share, and again, this wasn't too surprising, but these were some of those manager training areas. And it's one that we spend, in fact, we just published a blog this week, and I'm happy to share if anyone wants to pick me on sales manager training versus general leadership training. And oftentimes it's like, oh, we already do leadership training, or we have that, or HR covers that. And it's like, enabling our frontline managers is different. And anybody who's done that or trained or enabled them, it's pipeline, it's deal coaching, it's motivating them to make phone calls, it's things that go beyond just standard leadership development. So I think we need to look at kind of all of these aspects. The two that stood out, and we had this conversation back in September, was recruiting, which is often covered. There's a recruiting program in place. But recruiting salespeople, what does that top performing profile look like? How do we use behavior-based interview? A lot of managers have never hired anyone before. So I think that's an interesting area for growth, and also, helping the managers with rev tech and implementing and kind of closing that gap. So the last piece on managers, and this was not surprising, but those top performing organizations tended to rate their managers as much more effective, right? They were doing a better job. They were just assessing them as, they kind of know what they're doing, versus the others, as you can see, how they break out. So the question is, how do we get them there? What are those things that we can do? Because if we have more effective managers, we're likely to get higher performance and better results. So how this all boiled down, just as takeaways, on the left-hand side are those priorities, and this is interesting. We asked about priorities over the next 6 months. What were they focused on? What were these organizations focused on between now and the beginning of 2025? And so these were their top priorities. So we're not saying these are their only priorities, but these are kind of the things that they're doing. And on the right-hand side are all of the others. And so the ones that are circled are the differences. A lot of them are similar, but they're focused on sales process. They're focused on sales training. These are things that top performing organizations are doing right now. So if you need impetus for a program that you're rolling out. And again, not that the other priorities aren't also important, but just wanted to share that with you. And then the last piece, go ahead.
Just really quick. Think back to that first slide that we showed about revenue organizations and quota and where we were in 2021 versus where we are now. The way I interpret this is not what, like as we take our screenshot of the picture and that kind of thing, and you'll get the deck, this is not what top teams do. This is what they're focused on right now based on the way the numbers were on that first slide. That's how I'm interpreting it.
That's great. So these 4 takeaways that we've highlighted are in the backside of your handout, and there are also some discussion questions there. And again, which ones do you feel like you're leaning in on, you're doing well, where is there opportunity for growth? And I will open it up for questions. We're happy to stick around, but I also want to be sensitive to everyone's time.